Welcome to Westminster Watch with me, Nick de Bois. On this week's show, we're reviewing 2023, the year that was. If you're struggling to remember what happened in July, let alone January, here's a quick reminder of the headlines. The start of the year saw doctors, nurses and rail workers on strike, demanding pay rises that kept up with inflation and the rising cost of living. In February, Nicola Sturgeon resigned as leader of the Scottish National Party and was questioned by police over a party finance scandal. It's left the Scottish nationalist plan for another independence referendum in disarray. In May, the UK crowned its new monarch, Charles III, in a ceremony that was watched by 400 million around the world. Unfortunately for the royal family, Prince Harry's tell-all autobiography also leapt straight to the top of the bestsellers charts. While for normal people the cost of living continued to rise as the British government's price cap for energy bills increased from $3,000 to just under $4,500 on the 1st of April. But at least inflation had started to fall. It began the year at 8.8% and by October had fallen to 4.7%. Inflation may have come down from record levels, but there were also record defeats for the government in several by-elections, prompting talk that Labour have become a government in waiting. The Conservative Party did win one by-election, however, by campaigning against the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone. It prompted Sunak to roll back net zero pledges in a policy shake-up. And that wasn't the only revamp. Sunak's cabinet reshuffle saw him get rid of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and bring back David Cameron as Foreign Secretary. Despite the sacking, Sunak's still pushing ahead with her flagship Rwanda migrant deportation policy. That's despite the courts deeming it incompatible with domestic and international law. The Prime Minister is also facing a rebellion from the right wing of the party, with the Immigration Minister resigning. It hasn't done much for their polling, though. The Tories remain marooned around 23% of the vote, while Labour remain ahead by a 20-point margin, figures that have barely changed over a rather eventful year. Now, let's bring in our panel. Joining us, we have political commentator Claire Pearsall, former Labour MP Simon Danczuk, and Director of the Independent Commission on UK-EU Relations, Mike Buckley. Welcome. And Mike, I'll turn to you if I may. We're looking back. So just before 2023, The Economist wrote a lengthy article on predictions saying the UK would have the longest and deepest recession in 2023, America would enter recession, and the EU zone would enter recession. In fact, it looks like growth in the UK is going to be between 0.5% and 0.6%. Rishi Sunak made it one of his claims right at the beginning that he'd fix the economy. He's done all right, hasn't he?
I'd be interested if you could tell me something that Rishi Sunak has done to fix the economy. I would say he's been incredibly lucky, but I would also say 0.5 to 0.6% growth is hardly something to shout about. I mean, it's just fair enough. It's not technically a recession, but it's not great, is it? Not in a country where we used to take at least 2% growth for granted for decades, and for the last 15 years we haven't seen any of that at all. I was at Resolution Foundation, a small think tank event on Monday, and they were pointing out that we've basically lived through 15 years of decline. Economic decline in our country, and we're not coming out of it. And the current government doesn't have any policies that are going to lift us out of it. And you might be referring to, or you might be about to refer to inflation as well, which has obviously come down over this year. But again, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have done nothing to bring down inflation. They've completely outsourced that to the Bank of England.
In a minute, before you anticipate
I do apologise.
My questions. not at all. But actually, you're absolutely right. The productivity issue has been far longer than 15 years. It's been actually an issue in the country for about 30 years. But remember that the people who did go into a recession were our European neighbours, Germany, for example. So whilst you're right to point out it's pretty small growth, it is growth when compared to our EU neighbours. That's not
Nonetheless,
bad at all,
British
is it?
people are now much poorer than their German counterparts. We're also poorer than our counterparts in New Zealand, in Canada, in Australia. Any comparator nation in Europe or outside of Europe, we're quite a lot poorer than they are. The average Brit is now 60% poorer than the average American. That is huge. And we're not quite so far below Germany, Austria, France, but we are significantly below those countries, and inequality has increased a huge amount. Wages haven't gone up meaningfully in this country since 2008. If they had done, the average Briton would now be £10,000 more well off than they are right now. That is a very meaningful sum of money. That is government failure. That is this government's failure.
But Claire, let me ask you, I mean, Mike rightly started to talk about the inflation and the cost of living crisis. Again, Rishi Sunak very ambitiously at the beginning of the year set out his 5 priorities, and he said, I'm going to halve inflation. And very interestingly, an opinion poll came out saying that just under half of the population, 46%, think Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have contributed to the fall. Most people think he had nothing to do with it and it was more Bank of England and elsewhere. Look, to be blunt, was it really a legitimate forecast to make that he, as Prime Minister, could control inflation?
No, it was. He is incredibly lucky that it has gone down as quickly as it has. But I think it's one of those pledges, promises, call it whatever you wish, that was always going to be able to come true. So he's always going to be able to look at it and say, well, I did this. It's not strictly true, he didn't. But he'll chalk it up as a win. I think it's always quite interesting that when you speak to the general public, so anybody outside of the Westminster bubble, and you say to them about inflation, and they believe that the Prime Minister, as you've just said, they believe the Prime Minister has done something, because inflation is not really understood. We all understand if we have less money at the end of a month, our bills are increasing, but we don't necessarily understand what causes inflation and what causes a decrease in inflation. And the Prime Minister kind of plays on that a little bit. So I think he's been incredibly lucky that that pledge has been ticked off his little list. But I'm not convinced that he can say that it was anything that he or the Chancellor had done personally to make it happen.
Does it matter whether he had any influence on it at all? I mean, a bit of luck, maybe, as Claire's suggesting. Bottom line is, if you're not in the Westminster bubble, you're probably thinking, thank goodness inflation has come down. But will the Conservative government get any credit?
I think they will get a bit of credit for it, and I think Rishi Sunak will get some credit for it as we get closer to a general election. I think he's steadied the economy. There's no doubt about that. We've just gone through a pandemic. We've got the Ukraine war. We've now got major problems in the Middle East. It's a very fragile national situation that we've had and still have. But what he's managed to do, following Liz Truss as Prime Minister, is stabilise the economy with Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor. And we've managed to avoid recession, and I think he will get some credit for that. I don't think Labour does itself justice by talking negatively about the country, actually. I think they continually talk the country down in an attempt to show the Conservatives up, and I don't think that works. I think the public, as we get nearer to a general election, will hold that against them.
Isn't that the problem, actually, for any opposition, Mike, but obviously for Labour, is that they want to be all about growth, they want to be all about the economy. They've tied themselves into a spot where they are now saying that we will only spend money if we get economic growth. And they're kind of saying the Tories have rubbished the economy, but suggest that they can get it right in a matter of months so they can start spending. Aren't they going to be hoisted by their own petard by constantly criticising how bad the economy is?
No, because there's no point denying reality. The last 13 years have been absolutely...
But aren't you denying a little bit of reality when
no,
you are...
No, not at all.
Well, when you're
under the last Labour government, we had
60
60 quarters of uninterrupted economic growth. No other government in this country's history can point to that. Wages rose dramatically over that period. The financial crisis ended that, granted, but most countries came out of the financial crisis much more quickly and much better than we did. Same with the pandemic. Most countries have come out of that, major hit to everybody's economy much more quickly than we have. The record of this government has been absolutely dire. There is no point denying that. And of course, it's Labour's job to say, well, we will do a better job. And we will do a better job. And Labour are not just saying we'll do a better job, end of story. They're evidencing how they will do that by investing in the productive industries and service sector of this country.
you're almost pulling a face there.
I know, I can't help myself. I think it's interesting when Labour point out that they're going to do a better job. And yes, as opposition, you're naturally going to do that. But they haven't adequately explained how they're going to do it. I know there are things like a windfall tax. I know there's the raid on VAT on private school fees. But all of these things have been spent 4 times over at the very least. And I think they have to be honest. To be able to put more into services, to put more into everything they want to spend on, there is going to have to be a taxation rise somewhere along the line. And I think that it's really disingenuous to the public to suggest that they're going to keep taxes low, they're going to be better than the Conservative Party, when you clearly can't have it all. And I think the one thing the Conservative Party hasn't done is make ridiculous promises over the economy, and I'm grateful for that, because to defend it is otherwise quite hard. But I think that Labour are not entirely sure of their own set of policies or their own figures going forward, and I think that's going to be a real problem.
One thing, if I may, Mike, I know you wanted to come back on that, but I'll just ask you this, Simon. It's legitimate of the Conservative government to say one of the holdbacks to productivity this year has been the huge number of strikes that have taken place. We began the year with a doctor's strike. We are ending the year with a doctor's strike. We had the RMT, the train strikes, regularly taking place. So lots of days lost, and there were other strikes in the schools and so forth through strikes, which, does hold the economy back. But would you say that looking back over this year, strikes have the political power that they used to have in the Thatcher era and the dying days of the Callaghan government back in '79?
Yeah, it does feel like we're getting back to a political situation where strikes are very much at the front of the political agenda, doesn't it? And it's interesting, these are all predominantly public sector strikes. So we've got a cost of living crisis, and those in the public sector who are paid from us, the taxpayer, feel that they can go on strike and dramatically increase their wages, whilst people in the private sector have to go without. And I find that just a little bit unfair. And I think it's something that the wider British public are concerned about, that people in the public sector are taking advantage of them. And so I would hope that we'll see fewer strikes in the future. But it has had a dramatic effect on the politics of this country.
Mike, in some senses, Rishi Sunak has kind of played a bit of a blinder on the strikes, because the rail strikes, whilst they dominated the news, people just worked from home and he let them carry on. The doctors' strike, would have made daily front page news, would have put huge pressure on the government. But actually, that hasn't happened. So it's not so much in the news as one would expect. So I come back to this point. Labour's position on the strikes is not altogether clear. Do you think that actually they haven't had as much political impact, but more economic impact in the last year?
Well, I'm going to disagree with both of you. The strikes, they have had a big political impact, I think. Rishi Sunak hasn't. I mean, if you look at the Conservatives' poll rating, its cost that's very high in 2019 as compared to Labour's, comes down under Boris Johnson. Actually, public trust in the economic competence of the two main parties switches under Boris Johnson in late 2021, so about a year before Liz Truss. But the Tories' poll rating absolutely drops off a cliff under Liz Truss for all the obvious reasons. It does not pick up under Rishi Sunak. He hasn't done anything to improve their poll rating. People aren't giving him the benefit of the doubt. They're not giving him credit for anything at all. Excuse me, I think one of the reasons they're not giving credit is he hasn't fixed anything. If he'd actually come in and he'd fixed things with, the rail unions or with the BMA or with the doctors' unions or the nursing unions, the midwives' union, then maybe people would give him a credit. Instead, he's just let these problems just hang on and disrupt people's lives and ruin people's lives. And you talk about the wage rises. I mean, wages have not gone up meaningfully for anybody in this country since 2008. But private sector wages have been increased much, much more in the last 18 months to keep pace with inflation than the public sector. The public sector wages have dropped off a cliff over the last 13 years. A lot of public sector workers have seen in real terms 25% pay cut. You combine that with however much inflation we've had. People can't make ends meet.
You're justifying the strike.
Of course I am, because I fully agree that they should have happened.
You're trying to justify the strikes, which is fair enough. That's entirely your prerogative to do. But if you look at the top 10 lists, you go to the YouGov polling, no one is factoring strikes as an issue of concern when it comes to voting.
No, but the vast majority of the public, however they vote, want the railways renationalised, for example, because they want them to work and they're currently not working.
Don't.
Yes, they do. And the NHS is absolutely at the top of people's list of priorities. We now live in a country where
Where's
you can't
your
get a
source for
GP.
that? The list I've got, it's not even there. The
You
NHS
can't get a
is, but the
GP
rest
appointment,
aren't.
and you can't be confident that you ring 999 and an ambulance is going to turn up to save your life or somebody else's life.
That's because the NHS doesn't work. And I don't think Keir Starmer is calling to nationalise the railways. I don't think anybody in the country are.
No, but they want them to work.
Except the Communist Party, perhaps, are calling for more nationalisation.
People want the railways to work, they want the NHS to work. At the moment,
But
neither of those
also, I
things
think
do.
that people don't care so much about the politics of it. They don't care. They just want their train to run on time. Or their train not to be cancelled whatsoever, which is what happened to me last night.
But they're well aware that that will only happen under a new government, which is
I
why the
don't-
Tories
I
are on
don't even
20%
think
and the
they-
Labour's on
that's-
45%.
That's a natural
Okay.
assumption for you to make, of course.
Well,
that
but
would happen,
that's the assumption the public are making.
but-
22% of people are planning to vote Tory at the next general election. They don't want this government to continue.
OK, well, let's talk a little bit about what is driving the voter intention. And Claire, I've got to bring this to you. We are all consumed these last few weeks with immigration when it comes to what's going on in Westminster. We've seen it peak recently with the resignation of the immigration minister. The Tory party, the governing party, is consumed by immigration. Yet in this list I keep referring to, it's about fourth on the list of priorities for people going in to vote. At 22% of people mention it, way behind cost of living, and that is subsequently followed by the NHS. What is going on in the Conservative Party that they've made this the year of immigration, once again, stop the boats, and it doesn't look like they're going to achieve any of that?
Because they believed it to be a vote winner. In some areas, immigration is higher up this list that you have. And I think it depends where you are in the country as to how affected you are by immigration. There are pockets in the country which see much more in the way of asylum seeker housing or communities being solely of one nationality or another. And there are parts of the country that see none. So I think it really depends where you are. For the Conservative Party and, in fact, the government, to put it front and centre is a ridiculous idea. It's one of those issues which no government has been able to sort. And we've seen it when we date back to Tony Blair times, if we're going to go back that far. Any government has a problem with immigration because at any point either people like it or they don't. It is a divisive issue. It is a toxic issue. You need to be able to just deal with it in the background and not have it front and centre. I think it's a massive mistake and it brings out the very worst in people.
I couldn't disagree more with that. The reality is that it's a major underlying issue with the public. You look at some of the James Johnson opinion polling that I think has come out today or yesterday, shows that it's an issue that's coming to the fore. I think the Conservatives are right to try and tackle it and to address it. It gives them their only chance of being successful. What we've currently got in British politics, and this is a fault I have to say, is this gathering around moderates within the Conservative Party, Starmer's Labour, all gathering in the centre ground, whilst the public are shifting to the right. And if this issue isn't addressed, mark my words, Reform will start doing better. You'll get very mixed results at the general election, and gradually, surely, without any doubt, we're going to move further to the right as a country.
Mike, does Labour fear an election on immigration? Because your party are not really saying anything. You're letting the Tories wallow in their own misery and saying, oh, we'll just sort things out.
Well, the Tories are making their own. I mean, they're making themselves.
But do you fear?
They're making themselves look ridiculous.
An election on
No, not at
immigration?
all. Not the Tories. I don't know what they're doing. I mean, I think just in comms terms, it's absolutely catastrophic. Particularly Rwanda. To keep banging on this policy, there's never going to be a flight going to Rwanda.
Well, you hope, because you've ruled it out. Now, if it
even
works,
if it does, they've said they'll take 200 people. We've got 180,000 people waiting to have
Mike,
their asylum.
You know as well as everyone
claims
else
assessed.
that this is all about a symbolic deterrent, and already boat numbers
that isn't deterring people.
Already, because it hasn't happened, but already numbers are down by
not because they're scared of going to Rwanda, because they know there's only 200
people.
places. That's largely because of
There's no cap on.
That's largely because of the agreement they put in place with Albania.
There's no cap on the number of people that can be sent to Rwanda. I think it's a great policy.
Well, we'd have to
Labour have no
solution. About that. We'd have to give them millions and millions more. It just simply isn't worth it.
Labour
but
have
in
no
terms
solution.
of
You have no solution.
Labour's
policy.
What is your policy?
In terms of whether the public care about it or not, most of the public don't. I was reading
That is absolute nonsense.
It is true. I was reading.
majority of the public
I was
in
reading
Britain support the
literally.
Rwandan
I was
policy.
reading about this
They
literally
don't.
yesterday. It is a top issue for Tory voters. It's the second most important priority for Tory voters. For Labour voters, it's the 10th most important issue. The Tories are playing a core vote strategy. It might shore up their 22% of the vote.
Well, Mike,
it isn't
can I
going to win
ask
the
you
many
about
new
that
votes.
data? Because I would be very surprised, but I don't have the data to hand, but if in the red wall seats, the seats Labour got absolutely crushed in 2019, are you seriously saying it's only the number 10 issue?
This is what I was told. It's not my data. This is data I was reading yesterday. On Delta Poll, in fact, if you want to know where it's come from.
Listen, I come from red wall areas. That's where my family are. That's where I've been brought up. I can assure you that immigration is a massive issue.
I mean,
in
it
parts of
genuinely isn't. I
Lancashire,
spent a lot
parts
of time
Greater
knocking on doors this
Manchester.
year in the red wall. It comes up occasionally, but it comes up very rarely because people can't afford to pay their mortgages. They can't afford to feed their kids. They can't afford to go on holiday.
not saying they
can't
aren't
get a
issues.
GP appointment. They're scared if they didn't have it, they're not going to get one.
Some of those
People have got
problems are
way more
related to
important things on
immigration.
their minds.
People relate many of those issues to immigration. Problems with housing.
A minority
problems
do,
with
but the
the
vast majority
NHS.
don't.
Right.
People know full well we've built no
All
houses in
related
this country
to
under this government,
immigration.
and they know full well we haven't invested in the NHS.
Well, now,
People actually know who's at fault, and they know it's the government.
Hang on, Mike. Let Claire come in.
Sorry, Claire, you go ahead.
Do we not think that by saying red wall, all we're doing is creating this homogenous lump of people? Now, the red wall area is very, very diverse. The communities are incredibly different. The economics of those areas are also incredibly different. And I think it's really bad to start lumping an area of the UK together and say all red wall seats think like this, because they don't. And some parts of the red wall, the so-called red wall, will see higher levels of immigration, but they will also see higher benefits of that because that's where the NHS has needed them. That is where they're fruit. Because you're shaking your head, but it's true.
Well,
This
there
is
are
the problem
going
with
to
the
be
moderate
universities.
Conservatives. This is the problem with the moderate Conservatives. I represented Rochdale, and at the time it took the second highest number of illegal immigrants in the country. So they're not coming into parts of London.
Do you mean asylum seekers?
Well, I mean illegal immigrants. That's what
Now,
I...
you see,
well,
now this
well,
is the kind of divisive language that I think is causing half of the problem
What's
in this
divisive
argument.
about asylum seeker and immigration? And
No,
immigrants?
calling people illegal. Because they're not.
Well, if they're coming over in small boats, they are illegal immigrants.
It's not illegal
no,
to claim
they're not.
asylum.
Well,
It is
listen,
not illegal to do that.
This centre-ground politics that you
No,
two
no,
occupy...
that isn't
It simply
correct.
isn't.
This centre-ground
Either
politics
something's
that you
illegal or it's
occupy,
legal. It
Before-
is
that
not,
means you're
it's
not
not
illegal
illegal
to
to
the
claim
broad
asylum.
public.
Before we get into a debate about what's legal and what's not, one thing you can probably all agree on is that if the population of this country is growing at 1 million a year, which is effectively what the latest reports show, and a lot of that is down to immigration, there are not enough houses to support people. The infrastructure is getting stretched, including the hospitals. It would be surprising if this was any lower than the top 4 issues, wouldn't it? And it's currently 4th in the YouGov November poll on top issues. So to dismiss it, Mike, as you're suggesting to do, and saying it's not going to be driving voters, means you're also dismissing their concerns about housing, about the NHS as well,
I'm not
doesn't it?
dismissing anybody's concerns, and if somebody is concerned about immigration, I'm very happy to have a conversation with them. And I've had hundreds of those
So
conversations
what's
this
the
year.
solution? If it's not the Rwanda policy, what's your solution?
The right policy is not a solution.
That
your
wasn't the
solution?
question. though, in
Getting 200
fairness.
people out of the country,
What's your
even if
solution?
that happened, is not
What's
a solution.
your solution?
It's also fantastically expensive.
You haven't got one, have you?
And
to what?
Mike, isn't that the problem?
Well, the problem, if you want to fix the asylum system, you need to process claims. Germany does it in a month. It takes us 2 years. So we need to employ people who are going to process claims. If a claim is assessed and someone's a genuine asylum seeker, we need to give them
let me
refuge,
ask you,
as we're
no, Mike.
obligated to
Let
do.
me ask you on
If
that.
they're
No,
not
Mike, on
genuine,
that point
then you return
specifically.
them to where they
Mike,
came
on
from,
that
if you
point
can.
specifically, this goes precisely to the challenge, doesn't it, for the Labour Party if they want to come into power. Is you've got Rachel Reeves, your shadow spokesman, ruthlessly saying they will not spend another penny. And yet you've just glibly said you're going to go and hire thousands of people to process
Which would
claims.
be a darn sight cheaper than putting them in hotels, which is costing us £8 million a day. That is an unnecessary spend.
So, in fact, you will increase expenditure. That's
No,
what you're saying.
we'll reduce it by spending less on. We won't spend £8 million a day in hotels housing people. We'll process the claims.
Mike knows
Once you've
that he
processed the
can't
claim,
return- he can't
they can get
return
somewhere
them.
to live. They can get a job. They can contribute to the
He
economy.
knows he's been disingenuous because he knows
No,
he
not at
can't
all.
return those people to their country of origin because they throw away their passports
Some of
and
them
won't cooperate.
Some of them
so if
you can
haven't-
return.
So if you can't return them to Rwanda, send them to Rwanda.
Can I put the
You've
last
got
word to
leave
Claire,
them,
please?
Yeah, I think
I'm going to put the
that's
last
probably
word
a
to
great
Claire,
idea.
if I may. You've worked for a former immigration minister, Caroline Noakes, in the House of Commons. How divided is the Conservative Party in 2023, and what does it mean for 2024 on this issue?
On this issue alone, it is so incredibly divided. It is split.
Could they fall over this?
I think they absolutely could. I think that we are heading into an election year with not even a fractured party, a broken Conservative Party. This issue really has cut to the core. It's quite upsetting now to see 5 different factions within the Conservative Party fighting each other on one issue.
And the last word does go to Claire. That may, of course, that last word be music to the ears of Mike Buckley, one of my guests today, and Claire Pearsall. Thank you very much for joining me, and Simon Danczuk. Don't forget to check out TRT World on YouTube for more lively debate and conversation as witnessed here today. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.